right. Hello. Welcome. Welcome, everybody. This is being recorded. Just wanted to let you know ahead of time. Um, and welcome, Rhode Island educators. This is a 30-minute webinar really for you. I'm Allie Weiss with Amplify Science, and I thank you for being here today. We're hoping that you'll learn some practical strategies today through high quality science materials that can help develop your students into scientific thinkers that certainly they're capable of being. As you know, the Department of Education has a high quality a science curriculum initiative in place. And our hope today is to show you how students can question, investigate, and communicate in using those high quality materials. And what better resource than the Lawrence Hall of Science, who has helped create some of these materials that you're using in the classroom. Um, and I'm joined by Rebecca Abbott, who is our professional learning lead at UC Berkeley's esteemed Lawrence Hall of Science. Rebecca will share her expertise on how to develop that confident scientific thinker. And we hope that you get a lot of benefit out of today's session. Feel free to post questions in the chat. We don't want you to hold back any questions that you have as she moves along today. I will check those and answer them as we move along. But thanks so much, Rebecca, for being here today with us. We really appreciate your time. And I will hand it off to you.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, Allie, for hosting this workshop and having me talk about Rhode Island student scientists, the materials that make it happen. And like you mentioned, my name is Rebecca Abbott, and I work at the Lawrence Hall of Science, which is part of the University of California, Berkeley. And so we have a handful of people joining us here live, and I'm hoping that many more will have opportunities to watch this recording afterwards. And so for those of you who are here, we'll have opportunities to interact a little bit in the chat as we think about this topic. So a little bit of background, and those of you who are here, feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. I'd love to know who is here while I introduce myself. And so just a little bit about the Lawrence Hall of Science. What we do there is part of the work we do is a public science center. We're located on the campus of UC Berkeley, and we offer programs to San Francisco Bay Area families and schools. But a big part of what the Lawrence does is in the curriculum development and research team, and that's the part where I work in. We've been creating national science curriculum for schools for nearly 50 years, and we have been very proud to partner with Amplify as our publishing partner to bring these instructional materials into the hands of schools and teachers and districts. So thank you again, everyone, for being here. And again, feel free to add yourself, or make sure when you're introducing yourself in the chat, you pick everyone so we can all see who's here. All right, so here is our plan for the next half hour. We will start off with some framing, talking about why we teach science. And then we'll talk about what science teaching learning might look like in classrooms, and then some practical next steps, how to support your teaching and learning in a way to help formulate student scientists. All right, and then any questions and answers we can answer along the way, or just feel free to add them in the chat. All right, so for those of you who are here, here's a question for you. We want to step back and consider the big picture, to think for a moment and then respond about this question, which is, why do we teach science? I'm sure you've considered this over the year, so reflect on your ideas. Why should students learn science in school? And after you've thought about that, you can go ahead and share an idea in the chat. So I'll wait just a moment and then share those out loud for those watching. So often when we ask people this question, they talk about, well, it's because we want them, because they're already curious about the natural world. It's why should students learn science in school? Because it's something they get excited about. It gets them to be critical thinkers, to develop their curiosity, to develop appreciation for the world around them. And then, so those of you who are here, maybe you have thoughts like that already. And those of you watching also thought of those. Here's a few more that we thought of too. There's all kinds of good reasons to teach science in school, to either create a foundation for later learning, to strengthen a scientifically literate population, to honor students' natural curiosity about the world around them, plus a bunch of other reasons that I have here, or maybe ones that you've thought of. And the good news is that the current way the field is thinking about science education in classrooms right now helps us to do all these things. And the strong message that we're hearing is that in classrooms, we can have students really figure out like a scientist. So if you think of scientists who are doing these things, they're building ideas, they're engaging in understanding the natural world, they're working with others. Well, we want to mirror these same types of experiences for students. Whether these kids end up becoming scientists, or even if not, these are universal thinking skills, content, and practices that are really beneficial to their future overall. And like I said, the good news is we have a really solid foundation to do this kind of teaching and learning in the form of robust standards brought about by the NGSS and instructional materials that are available to schools. And of course, a major thing that we have going for us is educators like yourselves. Whether you've already been embracing a student scientist classroom already, or if you're just curious about it, it's just great that you can be here as a learner and keep learning about how to do this. So next, we'll get into thinking about what does it look like when students are figuring out like scientists. And so I'll have people add to the chat and thinking about, I'll be sharing a series of science lessons. And what I'll have you do is think about what are the benefits of a lesson like this and what are the limitations. These lessons are from a unit, the Lawrence, designed for the fourth grade standards around structure, function, and information processing. And you can see the standards listed here. The lessons are from Amplify Science, but the ideas we're going to discuss are really meant to be generally applicable to any grade or any materials you're using. So this is just an example. Okay, so we're going to hop into this idea about vision and light. So one of the things that scientists and really the rest of us might get curious about is vision and light, because humans and animals use their eyes all the time. They use their eyes and their senses for all kinds of things, to get food, to get information from their environment, and to survive. Some animals can even see at night. Some can see underwater. We can't. And I want you to think for a moment if you've had any connections to those examples I just said. What did you start to picture in your mind? And you can add to the chat or just be thinking about, have you ever been in a really dark place where you couldn't see? What about where you're sitting now? Could you turn off all the lights and still see the things around you, or would it be too dark? And why? Why could you or couldn't you see what's around you? And what about if you had a cat or a dog? Would they have trouble in a dark room? Would it be different, and why? And what other things would you wonder about when the lights were off, and what questions would you have? Well, these are the kinds of things that get kids and others curious, and these are called phenomena. And so one things we can do in the classroom is start to investigate these phenomena, things that are happening in the natural world that get us curious, and we can start to figure out ideas that help us understand them better. And so in this case, we might investigate, how does light allow us to see something, to see objects? So one way we can investigate is through trying this out. I'm going to show you two very short clips of videos and what's called a box model. And there's no sound on these videos. It'll just give you a sense of what kids would be doing in class. Inside these two box models that you can see on the screen are some objects, and students are looking through a hole in the box to see if they can see or not see the objects, or how well they can see them. So I'll go ahead and play the first one. It's real short. And again, there's no sound. Okay, so that was the first clip, and here's the second clip. All right, so a couple observations these kiddos made. And when we think about the benefits of a lesson like this and the limitation, there's a lot that we could say about this. Well, about the benefit of actually picking something up and looking inside of it, it's a way to try it out for yourself. It's something that, oh, I never thought about it this way. I can see or not see, or make a chart of a table of what I observed. You can talk to people about what you see. You can see different amounts of light. And again, you're making observations. Some of the limitations might be things like, well, it might not be completely dark inside the box. It might, and also when you're talking to someone else, you might not completely understand exactly why you can or can't see what is inside the box, but you know that you can or can't see it, but not be able to explain why, at least not yet. All right, so here's lesson number two. Lesson number two is reading a book called I See What You Mean. Students would read a book about two girls trying to figure out ideas about how they see different objects in their living room, just everyday objects. You can see in this picture, they're holding a flashlight up to a peach. So one girl is asking the other girl about this, what's happening, and the character's asking her friend questions, and the friend explains that this idea that light reflects off of objects. Even if they're not shiny, the light still reflects off the object. And she continues to explain that when the objects reflect light, the light goes into our eyes, and that allows us to see the object. And so students might read this book with a partner, or it could be read out loud to them, or read multiple times. But there are some benefits to a lesson like this, but there's also some limitations. So the benefits are things like there'd be some really important concepts that would get introduced, like reflection, like these light rays that are coming from the light and then reflecting off these objects. And of course, there's opportunities in reading to read or to strengthen your reading to gain vocabulary, important ideas and concepts from the book. So those are all why this is a great activity. However, it's limited. If students only read this book, it might not have any other bigger context. Like, why are we talking about light? What do we need to figure out? What's the purpose here? And it might be that there are too many concepts that they're not familiar with if they hadn't have done the earlier hadn't have engaged in the earlier investigations with the box model. All right, so here we go. We're going to go on to lesson number three. A third lesson, the last lesson, has two parts. First, students would discuss these different models of light that you can see in the pictures here. You can see there's three pictures where there's a predator trying to see its prey. And I don't know if you can tell, but there's also some new elements that are introduced here, including the brain and the eye that are in the predator trying to see the prey. They discuss if any of these models are incorrect or if the models could be improved. And then after they talk about it, they go on to draw and write their ideas about how the predator sees its prey. And so let's think about the benefits and the limitations for this particular lesson. So for example, one thing is that students can take a look at these models, the images, and start to have a mechanistic explanation of light transmission. It's an opportunity to work out their thinking and their discussion, and then they can go ahead and write about it. And limitations of this, if they were just doing this activity without the others, a drawback is if they haven't experienced this on their own or what it's like to see in the dark, they won't really have a context for what this diagram is talking about or what it's trying to explain. So those are three different lessons, and there are benefits to each of them, but also clearly some limitations. And for example, and I mentioned this already, if you only got to look in the box, would you be able to figure out how light allows you to see objects? Or if you got to those models at the end without doing these other activities, would you be able to figure out which one accurately represents how a predator can see its prey? And this happens sometimes, often in classrooms. If you would walk in or observe a science lesson, you might see one of these lessons taught on its own, an investigation, or reading about a topic, or having a discussion in science. But the reality is that none of these can do the job on their own. And so maybe you already knew this was coming, is that we wouldn't use any of these experiences on their own. They are meant to be a sequence of learning with different experiences as sources of evidence. Each one is like a puzzle piece to complete the picture as students figure out how light allows us to see objects in the environment. And this is what we call a multimodal approach, where students are doing, talking, reading, writing, and visualizing to figure out ideas like a scientist would. Not only does it give us different sources of evidence in this process of figuring out, but it allows multiple opportunities for students to make sense of what's happening. And we sometimes refer to this as having multiple at-bats with the content. This multimodal approach is very different from a transmission model of learning where information is given via lecture or vocabulary is memorized, or where students learn information on their own through reading textbooks. that may have been experiences of many of us growing up or of our experiences teaching in the past, but we've thought more about the approaches and how students can do the figuring out because it's really an active student-centered approach where activities are facilitated so students can ask the questions. They get curious, they look for evidence, and they're the ones who are doing the sense making. So more about this multimodal approach, we've had opportunity to partner with some research organizations to take a look at what the learning effects are from this type of approach. And so here's a graph from a place called the Independent Evaluators from the Center for Research on Evaluation Standards and Student Testing, called CREST. What they did was they did a side-by-side study where some of the students engaged in multimodal instruction, like I just described, and that's portrayed in green on the graph and compared to a control group that engaged in business as usual ways of doing science. And this was either just a kit-based program or a textbook-based science program. And so the groups of students engaged in the multimodal approach had more gains in reading comprehension and in science vocabulary and in science knowledge. And students using the multimodal approach consistently outperformed students in the comparison groups with different writing is measured by the strength of introduction, the use of evidence, and so forth. And finally, it had really powerful results for English learners as well. English learners who experienced multimodal instruction significantly outperformed other English learners in reading comprehension, science vocabulary, and science content knowledge. And so, as we continue on, it brings us to this idea about how do we do this? What are some tools and resources you can use to support students to figure out like scientists? Like I said earlier, we're in a really good place right now since we have a solid foundation to do this kind of teaching and learning. This is in the form of robust standards brought about by the NGSS, support at the state and district level, and various initiatives that are coming out of Rhode Island, for example, and instructional materials. So I'll point us to this idea about instructional materials and the multimodal approach I just described, for example. That wasn't a haphazard series of lessons that were put together, but really it's a carefully designed instructional sequence that meet the standards. At the Lawrence Hall of Science, we believe strongly and have a body of evidence that supports that teachers simply do not have the time to create such a careful sequence of learning in the same way that a professional team who has years to research and design and study and find effective results the same time that they would have to do this. We also strongly believe that in the skilled and caring hands of teachers that these materials can really come to life and create rigorous and engaging learning experiences for students. And so we'll take a quick look at this quote from the RAND research study that says, although instructional materials themselves cannot be expected to lead to student learning, a growing body of evidence suggests that the use of instructional materials that are high quality, accompanied by professional learning supports, is associated with improvements in student achievement. So in other words, if the teachers don't have the capacity to design curriculum, then having these instructional materials in the hands of skilled and knowledgeable educators can really lead to improvement in student achievement and learning. And so because of all these findings, there has been a call in many states for what are called high quality instructional materials. And there are particular criteria that designate materials that we can call them high quality. And those are things like having a coherent instructional sequence. They need to be designed to meet the standards. And of course, they need to be designed for teachers. They need to provide supportive structures for teachers, helping you learn as you go and helping you use the materials with ease. And there are a number of resources in the field that support educators in selecting and implementing HQIM or high quality instructional materials in science. Those resources are found at EdReports. Each state usually has a website that's very supportive in finding these materials and what's on the lists. Amplify does have some look for guidance for HQIM, and NSTA also has some guidance on finding high quality instructional materials. And so that's the message to end on, that these HQIM that can support teachers to create classrooms for students to be student scientists, through a multimodal approach where they are doing and talking and reading, writing and visualizing. Students have opportunities to inquire like a scientist, to think like a scientist, to quantify like a scientist, to read, talk, write, critique, and argue. In other words, figure out like a scientist. And so, as a next step, we really encourage you to keep looking into this, how you can utilize HQIM to support your student scientists. And we wish you the best of luck. And we'll pause there to see if anyone has questions.
Yeah, thanks so much, Rebecca. Does anybody have any questions? Feel free to type them in the chat if so. Um, Again, I'm Allie Weiss with Amplify Science. I'm going to pop my email address in the chat, but I hope you found this time beneficial today. If you were able to develop or learn about some practical strategies using high quality curricula, feel free to reach out to me if you'd like to discuss more about high quality science materials. Happy to have that discussion with you, but we really appreciate Rebecca's time today. And thank you for joining, and we will certainly send out the recording as well. And I put my email address in the chat if you'd like to reach out and talk further about this.
So that might have just gone to hosts and panelists. There we go.
Oh, there we go. Okay, you're right. It's in the chat now.
Perfect.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Rebecca.
Yeah, thank you for hosting and good luck to everyone on this journey.